Tonight we begin with a development that US intelligence officials had feared, Israeli defense commanders had prepared for, and Iranian hardliners had long threatened. A strike that unfolded not over days but in minutes. Minutes that shook the foundations of Middle Eastern security. Minutes that brought two nations closer to full-scale war. Minutes that forced Washington into emergency crisis mode. What Iran did tonight crossed a line that the Biden administration had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Israel did not hesitate. They responded with precision, fury, and unmistakable force. For weeks now, there had been signals. Not official statements, not diplomatic cables, just signals. That Tehran was preparing something unprecedented. Iran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. And their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Tel Aviv this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian missile activity know the indicators, the movement of mobile launchers, the fueling of ballistic systems, the activation of targeting radars, the sudden communication blackouts. Hey, all of that went quiet 3 days ago. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Tonight, it got loud. 5 missiles, 1 target. Netanyahu's underground command bunker. Early this evening, Israeli defense systems detected what they described as multiple ballistic trajectories originating from western Iran, including launch signatures that had not been activated in over 18 months. And these are the kinds of weapons that Iran only deploys when they are signalling something very specific: escalation, retaliation, or direct confrontation. US officials didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Iran was changing posture. And when a nuclear threshold state shifts posture without explanation, even by 1 degree, the Pentagon pays attention. Tonight, every radar system in the eastern Mediterranean lit up, every Israeli Iron Dome battery activated, and 5 missiles screamed toward Israeli airspace. The warning issued by the White House tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official described Iran's move as reckless, provocative, and perhaps most importantly, potentially catastrophic if unanswered, but intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response tonight was among the most decisive we've seen in this conflict. Here's what we know. Within 90 seconds of missile detection, Israel activated its Arrow 3 defense system. These weren't the standard Iron Dome interceptors. These were exo-atmospheric kill vehicles, systems that Israel only deploys when they are preparing to neutralize ballistic-class threats. All 5 Iranian missiles were destroyed. Not one reached Israeli territory. Not one. And then Israel did something Iran did not expect. They struck back. Tonight, IDF command confirmed that Israel launched retaliatory strikes on Iranian military positions, and including a Revolutionary Guard command center that had recently been fortified for what analysts believe was coordination of tonight's attack. Israel struck before Iran could reload. They hit the launch sites, they hit the radar installations, they hit the fuel depots that were likely preparing to support a second wave. In other words, Israel targeted the entire kill chain. The infrastructure that would have made a follow-up strike operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Iran's attack wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of escalation that could trigger regional war if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't bomb civilian areas. They didn't strike Tehran directly. They hit military command nodes. They hit weapons infrastructure, precision, calculation, devastation. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. US intelligence officials now believe that Iran's strike was designed to test the reliability of Israeli defences after months of regional distraction. Tehran wanted to see whether Israel would falter under simultaneous pressure from Hezbollah, Hamas, and now direct Iranian aggression. But instead, the opposite happened. Israel didn't falter. They executed a defensive response that was so rapid, so coordinated, that even Iranian commanders noticed. You don't get Tehran's attention easily. But tonight, Israel did. Or defense analysts speaking with NBC under anonymity described Iran's miscalculation as strategic overreach, a way to project strength that instead exposed weakness. But Israel proved tonight that they remain both vigilant and lethal. Their interceptors were not only accurate, they were timed so precisely that Iranian missiles never crossed into sovereign airspace. That timing matters because it shows something critical. Israel is not reacting to threats. They are anticipating them. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Israel's response. Israeli Air Force jets carried out strikes on 3 Iranian positions inside Syria, forcing emergency evacuations. Naval forces targeted weapon shipments that had been flagged in the last 72 hours. Cyber units operating from undisclosed locations reportedly disabled Iranian radar systems used to coordinate the missile launch. This wasn't just defense. This wasn't just retaliation. This was coordinated multi-domain warfare. This was strategic dominance. And strategic dominance is the one thing Iran has struggled to maintain since this conflict began. For every advance Tehran has made, Israel has countered with something that erases the gains entirely. Remember, Iran thought Israel was distracted. They thought the Gaza conflict had stretched IDF resources thin. They thought international pressure would paralyse Netanyahu's response. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Israel's defences held without a single failure. Israel's retaliation was immediate and devastating. Israel's message to Tehran was unmistakable. And you cannot strike us without consequence. You cannot threaten our leadership without response. You cannot test our resolve and expect silence. Tonight, Iran learned that lesson again. What makes this moment so dangerous and so unpredictable is that Iran's strike happened at a time when Supreme Leader Khamenei is under immense internal pressure. Hardliners want escalation. Reformists want diplomacy. The Revolutionary Guard wants dominance. The economy wants relief. Khamenei is balancing these demands while managing a proxy network that spans 4 countries. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Tonight's missile strike may have been less about hurting Israel and more about showing domestic audiences that Iran remains powerful. But that performance just backfired spectacularly. The White House statement, now circulating across every major news network, was designed to signal that America is not willing to tolerate direct attacks on its closest Middle Eastern ally. Officials said plainly that Iran's aggression was inconsistent with any pathway toward regional stability. That is diplomatic language for, you just made a massive mistake. You don't usually hear that tone from the State Department unless something serious is at stake. Tonight, something serious is at stake. The entire framework of Middle Eastern deterrence is being tested in real time. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Israeli public in a brief, defiant speech tonight. He said, "We intercepted every missile. We struck every launcher. We will accept no threats to our survival." He said, "Iran's regime has made a grave error." And he said, "The state of Israel does not wait for permission to defend itself. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a government that understands just how high the stakes have become. Israel is signalling total resolve." Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's strike wasn't isolated. Along with the missile launch, Hezbollah also activated rocket units along the Lebanese border. Houthi forces in Yemen launched drones toward Eilat. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq increased reconnaissance flights targeting US positions. All of this happened within the same 2-hour window. When Iran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This wasn't a single provocation. This was coordinated regional pressure. And Israel just sent a message that coordination works both ways. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing for sustained confrontation. Another is that Tehran is attempting to force diplomatic concessions through military pressure. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is testing the limits before its nuclear program reaches a critical threshold. But tonight, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't wait for UN resolutions. They didn't wait for American approval. They didn't wait for international consensus. They acted, and that action changes everything. What we're watching now is a test of deterrence. Iran wants to see whether aggression brings rewards. Israel wants to show that aggression brings consequences. Washington wants to prevent regional collapse, and Tehran wants to prevent looking weak. These four forces are now colliding in real time. The next 48 hours will determine which direction this crisis moves. Tonight, we've heard from Pentagon officials who are now monitoring Iranian military communications. They say there are no indications of an imminent second wave. They say Iranian commanders appear to be reassessing after the failed strike. And they say Iran's decision to target Netanyahu directly is likely part of a desperation strategy intended to provoke overreaction. But Israel is not overreacting. In fact, Israel is calibrating. Their response tonight, measured, devastating and precise, sent a message to Tehran that miscalculation has costs. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Israel's interception was flawless. It prevented casualties, it demonstrated capability, and it restored deterrence. What happens next will depend on what Tehran does in the next 48 hours. If they escalate, this moment will be remembered as the beginning of something far worse. If they retreat, Israel has already shown they are ready. And tonight, for the first time in months, Tehran appears to be uncertain. The Revolutionary Guard is quiet. Too quiet. And when Iran is quiet after a failure, it means they are recalculating, because tonight Tehran learned something they should have already known. Israel does not bluff. Israel does not hesitate. And Israel does not lose. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Iran blinked first.